is Thursday, the 7th of March, 2019, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside around the UK and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So it was Warren's birthday quite recently.
It was his 30th birthday.
It was Warren's 30th. Warren, who sits diligently, silently in the corner
Of every recording, even when we're recording from Mike's office or from a small room in Mike's office building.
Little side room.
A little hub.
We're in the little hub today, which is good. So, so we did a night for Warren's 30th. We did that at the Casa, where we normally do Skeptics in the pub. So we did
Just our regular, yeah.
I had to wire the speaker into Alice's phone. That was good.
Because I created a playlist. We might have mentioned on the show before that Warren doesn't like music. Pretty much any music, apart from 90s hip-hop.
Okay,
so
good.
The playlist was largely 90s hip-hop, a little bit of R&B, and then some general other stuff from the 90s and early 2000s that other people might...
Oh, for the crowd. That was for the crowd.
Crowd pleasers of the 90s.
Yeah.
Like one for the pot. Like
doing tea bags.
Yeah.
Or like packing socks when you go away.
Yeah, one extra pair. You never know. Just want one extra pair of socks.
I've got the technique on packing socks when you go way down, and it's the Happy Days theme tune. Monday, Tuesday, Happy Days, third one. Okay. Wednesday, Thursday, Happy Days.
Happy Days, good.
It's how you pack enough socks for a week
works.
away.
That's legitimate. That fully works for me. And happy birthday to Warren. I'm sure he's
30 now.
Nod sagely in the corner.
That's weird because I still think of you and Warren as being very young.
Yeah,
you're getting less young.
Time progresses.
You know, I mean, it's weird, isn't it?
30's quite... I'm 40 this year, so...
You are 40
this year. It's all the big birthdays this year, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm 40, my mum's 60, my grandma's 80, all within about 3 weeks of each other. In fact, it's my sister's birthday today.
Is she 20?
My younger sister is... it's her birthday today.
If she was 20, that would work, because then it just means that people in your family are only allowed to sort of procreate every 20 years.
Every 20 years.
You have to give birth at 20 or not at all.
It's like Stephen King's It.
Yes.
We just emerge every 20 years to procreate and then disappear back into a sewer again with a balloon.
Yeah, very much so.
That's exactly how that goes.
We did other things for Warren's birthday as well. We did go to an escape room in Liverpool.
I love an escape room. I do love an escape room.
But it's the first time I've been to that particular escape room.
Right.
And therefore I found it really, really, really hard. Like normally we go to escape rooms and I don't think we ever really ask for clues.
No.
You usually have an option to ask for clues.
Yeah. I've only done a couple, and the one time we did an escape room with you, it was jail-themed. It was prison-themed. And so when we kept hearing this police siren going off, we just thought that was part of the background ambient noise setting the tone, but it turns out that was him trying to give you a clue. And we never bothered looking at it, so we just carried on without it. Yeah.
But this one we did... at the weekend was really hard. We asked for so many clues. We kept ringing the bell they give you a little bell when you go in to ring for clues. Because every other escape room I've ever been into is largely combinations and padlocks and figuring out key codes.
I'm a bit over it for that reason. There's only so much I can do a padlock.
This one, there's like keys hidden on rope in random places that you've got to kind of thread through. There's like special things that you have to knock a certain number of times. There's things that have smell. There's like...
They have smell?
Yeah.
Is that the lock?
We had to organise things by smell in order to get the code.
That makes more sense. I thought you meant like it was a lock that worked on the smell. So you had to like emit the right smell to unlock something.
How do you organise something by smell? It's not like there's an intrinsic order like the alphabet.
Well, there was more to it than that. I'm being deliberately vague because I don't want to give away the room.
It could be like, put the one that smells of coffee on this spot.
Okay.
And the one that,
Yeah.
There was one clue opened up a musical thing that started playing and then you had to try and reproduce the sound. Like, it was
There's a lot going on there.
Incredible use of like different techniques and styles to get you to figure out this room. It was amazing. But it was really, really, really hard because we'd gone in on the, escape rooms are all combinations and key codes and putting things in order, and suddenly there's like all these extra things to think about.
Well, the one that we did, was it your birthday previous year?
Yes, it was.
Your birthday last
we
year.
did one for my birthday. I think we did one for... I think it might have been Warren's birthday, actually.
It might have been, yeah. But the one that we did for your birthday last year, that I was on the same team as...
We tend to do these things for you or Warren who don't drink, don't we? It's,
yeah, that's true.
Let's do the non-drink themed birthday events.
But there was a particular door that we were finding hard to unlock, and then Andrew, was in our team, and he managed to unlock it. And we asked him afterwards how he unlocked it. He said, it turns out there was a button that opened it. And the button was, in case of emergency, press here, and he didn't realise. He was like, press to exit. He said, exit. Oh, that was easy enough. I can't believe we didn't just see the button there, so that doesn't count. We had the key in our hands, it was fine. But
Fully doesn't count.
Absolutely doesn't count, yeah. An article in the Daily Record a couple of weeks ago proclaimed, workers with back pain take 12 sick days off per year. Apparently, according to the article, 4 in 10 office workers who spend the majority of their time at work sitting don't feel like they're able or allowed to take regular breaks. And so 45% of those with back pain or neck pain identified that sitting for long periods was a trigger and walking around was a way to combat the pain. And this all comes after a research paper in The Lancet found that lower back pain causes half of work absences across the EU, which I guess once we're out of the EU, we'll be able to then vote ourselves out of back pain.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things, one of the promises about the sunny uplands.
So on the side of it, but we give 350 million a week. Let's get rid of back pain instead.
That was exactly
it would save us a lot of money.
Just vote ourselves out of back pain. So this story, though, about 12 workers with back pain taking 12 days off a year, that seems unusual to me, that 4 in 10 office workers are taking the back pain off. And so when I looked into it a little bit further, it turns out that the 12 sick days off per year wasn't actually from the Lancet study. It was from another study that was piggybacking, if you can piggyback on a study about back pain without causing further back pain. Okay. I'm not 100% sure, but it was piggybacking on the Lancet study. And so the study which found about how many people were taking days off work because of back pain, it turns out was a study by the British Chiropractic Association.
Of course it was.
Which found that a third of Brits have had at least one day off due to back pain in the last year. And if that sounds high, that'll be because this isn't really a particularly well-conducted study. I know that you own a business, Mike. How many of your workers would you say, without giving away too much information about their personal health history?
I am not aware of anyone ever having taken a sick day for back pain.
We're 3 people in a room. 1/3 of us should be taking time off for back pain. One of us has a chronic joint condition that causes pain.
True.
And I don't think any one of us has had any time off for back pain in the last year.
In the last year, no, exactly. So these numbers are obviously grossly inflated. One of the reasons they're grossly inflated is because this is a press release put out by the British Chiropractic Association to get people to think about their back health and then get people to think about how they can solve that back problem. The BCA's president, Catherine Quinn, said no one should feel they need to be chained to their desk all day at the expense of their health. With so many workers missing work due to the condition, it's truly in employees' interest to offer proactive help and advice to protect the health of their employees. And you can already see the marketing angle that the BCA are going for. Hey, workers, hey, businesses, why don't you get the BCA or get a chiropractor in to assess your workplace, etc. If you wonder what this study was by the BCA, well, as this Daily Record puts it, about 2,000 adults were polled on back pain and 1,600 had at some point suffered from it. A couple of things I found irritating there. One is the 2,000 number, which almost certainly means this is a PR survey. And almost certainly, given that the BCA have had a long-running relationship using one poll for their PR service, is almost certainly a one poll. Online, uncontrolled, self-reported marketing survey.
A jot of evidence, you could even say.
There's barely a jot to
actually,
it.
I don't think it is. It is a jot
jotless. It is jot-free.
There is not a jot of evidence.
Yeah. But also, I mean, for a minor point, I absolutely hate the current trend for journalists and professional newspapers to use about for numbers. It's about 2,000 people. No, it's around 2,000 people. You're not talking to your mate in a pub. You're publishing the Daily Record here. This is the story of Record. Get the actual your syntax and things to a professional standard.
More about that later. Sorry, more around that later.
More around that later, yeah. So the BCA seem to appear in the news fairly often. I've covered it on the show in the past, but even in the last year they've been doing it. For example, last year they also warned that the way that you're sitting while you're driving is secretly causing you back and neck problems, which it can't be that secret if you've got back and neck problems. I don't know how secret you can have a back problem and it still be a problem to you. But the Express warned...
secret back problem.
Yeah, it's just a secret back problem. It's just not telling you about it.
Your back hasn't told you. Your back hasn't said. It's,
no.
I don't know. I think that's okay.
You think you've got a secret back problem?
Yes. It can happen because you can have back pain can manifest in other places, and you've suddenly got neck pain, and you didn't realise it was caused by your back giving
that
you
is
a
a
problem.
secret back
But
problem.
we'll come to that. But it was also causing
You're
you
saying-
secret back and neck problems.
Your neck is a secret back. Is that what?
Yeah.
I have loads of referred problems when my ribs have gone tense, and I haven't noticed my ribs have gone tense, but suddenly my shoulder and my back and my neck are all fucked because of this one problem with my
Secret
ribs
rib
that I
problem.
hadn't noticed.
You got a secret rib problem.
It's entirely plausible.
Okay, Alice says this article coming up is entirely plausible. Bear that in mind.
That sentence.
That the
entirely
resident
plausible.
biological expert of this podcast believes it is entirely plausible that drivers in the UK, according to the Express, are being warned about the potential back and neck problems that can occur when they're behind the wheel. Recent research by the British Chiropractic Association estimates that more than 5.5 million drivers could suffer from these symptoms as a result of time spent driving. On average, the article says, UK motorists are spending 31 hours a week behind the wheel of their car. On average, UK motorists are spending 31 hours a week behind the wheel of their car. That is on
impossible.
average just less than 5 hours a day for 7 days of the week. On average.
That's quite a lot.
It's quite a lot.
And it's quite a lot.
So let's imagine that you are doing the majority of your driving to and from work. That will be a daily commute of 2 to 2.5 hours to and 2 to 2.5 hours back, 5 days a week on average.
Yeah.
Now, even by average, that's not going to be mean or median, but either way, we have to have some people really going up to account for the people who work from home, the people who get the train to work, the people in London, for example, who don't drive.
Yeah.
These are clearly ludicrous statistics, and again, they're coming from surveys of 2,000 people, and therefore they're online marketing surveys, and it just goes to prove that you cannot trust the numbers in these stories. And a very cursory sense check would prove to you that this couldn't possibly be true. But Tim Button, the BCA's chiropractor and ergonomic consultant, said, many of my patients have complained of neck or back pain while driving, particularly on long journeys. So it's important that people are aware of the best ways to protect their back health while they're in their car.
What was his job title again?
BCA chiropractor and ergonomic consultant. It's back.
Well,
if you're going to do a sneer, at least make it audible for
I was taking umbrage with him referring to them as patients instead of clients if he's an ergonomic expert.
Consultant, yeah.
That's
He
the
consults
word.
on
But
ergonomic issues.
he thinks he's a doctor, doesn't he? So.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that a bit more as well.
Ergonomic consultant means he just fits very well into your office.
Yes, you can store him away pretty well, pull him out when you need to.
Some consultants you get, they just don't understand the office culture. They just don't fit very well. But he's a very ergonomic consultant. He just comes in, he fits right in. It's brilliant.
Around the same time as that Express story about the driving issues, the Mail reported that back and neck pain are at a 5-year high in Britain, with sedentary lifestyles believed to be to blame. More than 2 in 5 people are suffering from back and neck pain, which affects 12% more of us than a year ago. The British Chiropractic Association says 70% of people in the Midlands experience back and neck pain before they are 30.
That's probably because people from the Midlands have to commute to jobs.
It's probably
decent jobs.
It's probably because if you ask a group of people from around the country whether they have a thing or not, even if everyone is roughly the same, statistically the amount of variance that you get in a normal population would mean that one of the places is higher, one of the places is lower, and then you can say, well, Birmingham is the back pain capital of Europe, because it turns out that a slightly more people from the 2,000 people that you sampled said they had back pain in there. Somewhere's got to come top, somewhere's got to come bottom. But apparently, the latest figures are based on a study of more than 2,000 adults. While I don't think it was more than 2,000 adults, I suspect it's just exactly 2,000 adults because of the way that OnePoll's business model works. While 30% of those questioned in 2016 reported suffering neck and back pain, that rose to 44% by 2018, up from 32% in 2017. Which is a very irritating way of giving those figures. How you say the 2016 figure was raised to get to the 2018 figure, which was up from the 2017 figure. Just put them in order. Stop being fucking fancy. But each of these studies are all results produced by surveys of 2,000 people. I strongly believe they're all PR surveys. They're almost certainly all one poll surveys, and therefore we should take all of these findings with a very heavy pinch of salt. It also irritates me that when you see people who are proponents of alternative medicine, they'll say, well, the reason that this stuff isn't mainstream is only because the drug companies, they've got money to carry out scientific research, or we don't have the money to carry out scientific research. We don't have, where are we going to get that money from? Take it from your marketing budget. You're paying a fair few thousands of pounds a year to one poll for each of these stories. If there's 5 stories a year, your budget's probably in the 10 to 20 to 30 plus £1,000 just on this stuff alone. Mm-hmm. Spend some of that on a scientific paper, spend some of that on a well-conducted trial, and then we might talk. But put your marketing behind your evidence base and behind your research rather than ahead of it in terms of your spend. But those weren't the only piece of PR in the mainstream news from chiropractors of late. There was actually a long feature by the Telegraph's Judith Woods on February the 4th of 2019, which went into detail. And the article was actually titled, "Why I Am a Chiropractic Convert." I don't know if anyone saw this article in the Telegraph.
A chiropractic what?
Convert.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, just checking.
So Judith writes, "If you've never had all 10 toes loudly cracked by a chiropractor, I couldn't recommend it enough. It was bizarre, astonishing, weirdly sublime."
I mean, I couldn't recommend it at all.
I couldn't recommend it at all.
That sounds terrible.
It may well be bizarre, astonishing, and weirdly sublime, Judith, but it certainly isn't healthcare and has no role in healthcare. If you want a foot massage, get yourself a foot massage. It's absolutely fine. She says, "I hadn't even come in about my feet. I'd actually come about chronic nerve in my right arm, chronic nerve pain in my right arm. Some days it's so bad I can't even lift a glass of water, and putting on or taking off a coat hurts."
How do you go into a chiropractor with an arm problem? Like, your foot and your arm aren't connected.
No, and I think this is very telling. And she asks that question. She says, "Are you sort of playing with my feet because the song goes, your foot bone's connected to your ankle bone and it's all connected?" And she said, "I'm saying it half jokingly." And the chiropractor points out, "Well, I could point out that it's all about how your gait sets yourself off, but actually you mentioned in the consultation you had foot pain." And I think this is very telling. So a person goes to see a chiropractor with complaint A. The chiropractor asks about everything in their life, as you see happens with alternative disciplines, alternative therapies. Because you're talking about everything else, you mentioned several other things. You end up getting treatment for complaints B through D, some of which you didn't even particularly know that you had and weren't a problem to. Yeah. And then it makes it easier for people to convince themselves that the problem they didn't realise they ever had has actually gone away now, even if the issue that brought them to the chiropractor is no better. Yeah. So my arm really hurts. He didn't do anything for my arm, but the foot pain I didn't realise I had, I don't realise I have anymore.
Because I still don't notice it.
And she says, "To be perfectly honest, I wasn't entirely convinced that a professional dedicated to manipulating backs rather than my GP was the best place to get help." And again, early on in this article, here's a major problem here. It's based on a completely faulty assumption that chiropractors have a role to play in back health, which she accepts completely at face value just because they say so, and nothing more than they say so.
Yeah, your GP might not be the right person to see for that back pain, but they can refer you to a rheumatologist or a physiotherapist.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's even saying, she's saying, to be honest, that the foot pain that the foot problem I've been told I have, I wasn't convinced that a back person is the best person, or the arm pain that I had, I wasn't convinced that a back pain specialist would be the best for my arm pain. So you're right, it's got nothing to do with it at all. She goes on to write that new government reforms are dismantling the 70-year-old system that made GPs the gatekeepers for accessing all other care. She says last week Health Secretary Matt Hancock announced that, as well as in introducing more mental health workers to surgeries, physiotherapists, paramedics and pharmacists are to be given more proactive roles in frontline care. It marks a welcome sea change. She says, "All too often we apologetically go to the GP about a complaint that we know needs a few sessions of physio rather than a course of medicine. Getting the right treatment right away will save time, money and free up family doctors. And so, instead of seeking out my GP, I found myself at a chiropractor's having my feet manipulated."
But privately, surely?
Yes, yeah. In this case, yes.
In which case you could have gone to see a private physiotherapist.
I assume privately. I don't think she actually mentions. She does come to the cost a little bit later, but she doesn't actually mention whether this was an NHS thing.
If it's an NHS thing, she'd have had to go through her gatekeeper.
Yeah, you'd need a referral from your GP to the chiropractor to get it funded on the NHS. If she's gone directly to the chiropractor, that's got to be private, I think.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right. I think what she's saying is that Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, is opening things, is announcing changes to these things, and these changes will come in, which will allow there to be other things other than GPs able to take a proactive role in frontline care.
What she said there is a problem with how our GPs currently work.
Yes.
therefore chiropractor.
Yes.
They're two totally unrelated points.
What she said is the health secretary wants to give pharmacists and mental health professionals more freedom to see patients directly rather than relying on a referral from a GP. And that's why I'm going to see a chiropractor. Yeah.
The two aren't linked at all. And there are problems with GPs. Like, there genuinely are problems with getting access to healthcare that can be solved by lots of different solutions, some of which my practice has implemented, and some of the things that the health secretary might change, but it's got nothing to do with chiropractic.
Exactly. It's a bait and switch, although I would argue an unintentional bait and switch.
Yes.
And I think it shows how misleading this article could be. It's one thing to say pharmacists, mental health workers will have a more proactive role. Great. To conflate those qualified medical professionals with purveyors of an alternative health system like chiropractic is dangerous. As a reminder for any new listeners, because we talk about chiropractic and I think we don't do the basics on it so much, so any new listeners who might not be aware, chiropractic isn't a valid form of treatment. It splits essentially into people who think they can cure musculoskeletal issues, for which there's weak evidence that chiropractic has a weak amount of benefit for lower back pain over a very short period of time. No evidence that it has benefit for any other musculoskeletal problems as far as I'm aware. I haven't seen the very latest, but that was my previous understanding of it. But those are the people who just believe in musculoskeletal issues. And I think those are called straights in the chiropractic terminology. And then you have the mixers, who are the ones who believe that the spine contains a flow of something called innate energy, the blockages of which are the cause of all disease. This is an energy that's never been observed. There's never been any evidence to show that chiropractic can treat anything that isn't non-musculoskeletal, despite the fact that chiropractors routinely will make claims that they can cure colic in babies, or the original chiropractic claim was to be able to cure deafness by adjusting the spine and releasing blockages of energy.
There was a video went around not too long ago of a chiropractor giving spinal manipulation to a 2-week-old baby again.
Yep.
You know, which caused a big scandal and shock, and this is a terrible thing to do. It's, you know, even though we're not that far out from the last time a chiropractor was on video giving spinal manipulation to a 2-week-old baby.
And those aren't one-off issues. So one of the things that Good Thinking have done, my colleague Laura at Good Thinking called up a range, like 10, 15 chiropractors chosen at random and asked, could you do something to help a baby with colic? And they said, oh yeah, come in, we'll do a spinal manipulation on a baby. 6 weeks, Laura would say, is 6 weeks too young to be adjusted? No, if anything, it's 6 weeks too late. You want to bring the baby in. We have newborns the very day they're born, the very day after they're born coming in. This is routine in chiropractic care, chiropractic treatment.
How does that even make logical sense, that you're born with things that need correcting?
Well, they talk about birth trauma. They say, well, all birth is traumatic. Were they born with a Von Twos? Did they have to be sucked out? Was it a forceps delivery? Was
fine in the womb, but you just, knackered on the way out?
Yeah, well, not even necessarily fine in the womb. There are chiropractors who will do adjustments on pregnant women and do adjustments to the baby in the womb via the bump.
Oh, good God.
It's an area that is, because it is based in absolutely no evidence, and when it gets into the innate energy mixer side of things, it's an area that goes off into some very odd places, and it's not being controlled enough, not regulated well enough by an industry that seeks first to protect its members, arguably, rather than police the worst or the most pseudoscientific claims its members. And this is an industry that routinely claims things like regular manipulation of the spine can prevent measles. My colleague Laura, talking to chiropractors, would also have people saying to them, well, the chiropractor herself has a couple of children. They've never had any medicine. They've never had any vaccinations. That she just gives them regular adjustments, and that's what stops them getting ill. So chiropractic is a incontrovertibly bogus therapy. There is no evidence behind it, and certainly no evidence in the innate energy theory. So to conflate chiropractors with pharmacists and mental health professionals is a dangerous false equivalence. The article goes on to describe the type of treatment that she got on her feet. She said, using an activator tool resembling a cross between a sonic screwdriver and a bolt gun, the chiropractor released tightness across the soles of my feet with a series of dull thuds. And I can't believe she likens the activator to a sonic screwdriver, because one of them is a cheap-looking device that was made up in order to use as a panacea for any problem, as a deus ex machina for any situation. And the other's from Doctor Who. Yeah. Then she says he prepared me to have my neck cracked, gently taking me through the motion first before doing it. She said it was loud, not altogether pleasant, but necessary. Immediately afterwards, I felt better. My range of movement was freer. She says the chiropractor told her, this has been building up for years, and now your body simply can't tolerate it anymore. The pain is an unequivocal signal that something has to change. And yes, it might be true that you've had pain building up for years and that you have an issue that's causing nerve pain in your arm, but there's something that has to change. It doesn't have to be your vertebral integrity. There is no evidence that cracking your spine would be in any way useful for treating pain. There's just nothing there, certainly not pain in your arm. The article goes on to say, according to figures from Arthritis Research UK, musculoskeletal issues are on the rise due to lifestyle issues, including excessive screen time, causing posture, weight gain, and a lack of exercise issues.
Yeah.
Now, I actually had a look at what Arthritis UK said about chiropractic, and troublingly, actually, one of the pamphlets, I only found 2 pamphlets that mentioned chiropractic at all. One of them on neck pain does appear to endorse chiropractic, or at least describe it in ways that I think are unfairly generous to the chiropractors.
Sure.
It says physiotherapists, chiropractors and osteopaths are all trained to treat neck problems. Treatment carried out by one of these therapists, along with home exercises, are often all that's needed. It says chiropractic is a treatment for mechanical disorders of the musculoskeletal system, often including spine manipulation or adjustment. Chiropractic is given by a specialist, and the practice is regulated by the General Chiropractic Council in the UK. They even end with details as to how to find out more about chiropractic, including links to the British Chiropractic Association and the GCC. Another document from Arthritis Research UK looks at the evidence behind chiropractic and concludes there are serious doubts as to whether chiropractic works for the conditions that are considered. The trial evidence suggests that it's not effective in the treatment of fibromyalgia. There's little evidence that it's effective in osteoarthritis or chronic low back pain, and no evidence for rheumatoid arthritis. Now, I'm not sure then how happy Arthritis UK would be in being mentioned in an article that is so overwhelmingly positive about chiropractic.
Yes.
When the only things they say are, this is what chiropractors say they are, and okay, they should be much, much stronger about that. And here's the evidence, none.
Yeah, no evidence that it helps in rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah. So for the writer of the article, then pick up Arthritis Research UK as a reason why people should go and seek a chiropractor, I think is a misleading thing to do. Back to the article to carry on a little bit more. It says, 1 in 5 of us will see our GP every year with a complaint such as back pain. Treatments account for £4.8 billion a year, or around a third of NHS planned spending, yet very few health trusts will fund chiropractic treatment because it's classed as alternative or complementary treatment. Yeah, it says
not classed as is.
It is, yeah. And again, it's that kind of false equivalence, kind of bait and switch thing of saying yes, back pain is causing people a lot of problem, and it's going to be an expensive thing for the NHS. But to say yet very few health trusts will fund it is implying that they should when there's no evidence at all.
Yeah.
She says the NHS website states it's generally very safe, with the caveat there is a risk of more serious problems such as stroke from spinal manipulation, but the risk is extremely small. And yes, it does say that. The NHS website does say that it's safe. And actually, I looked up the NHS website. Disappointingly, they make absolutely no mention of effectiveness, which I think is really, really problematic and something that will
something could be challenged.
Yeah, that will challenge. Because if you look at the homeopathy page on the NHS, it says there's little no evidence that it works.
It's hard on it, isn't it?
No mention of evidence on effectiveness.
That might be related to how healthcare professionals and wider treatment regulating bodies would perceive people struggling with certain types of pain because it's largely not treatable. There's not a lot we can do about it. Well, if it makes a patient feel better, if giving them some encouragement to do something off their own back that might make them feel at least like they're doing something, placebo sort of thing. It's a bullshit excuse.
Yeah,
but
I prefer they were sending them to physiotherapy rather than chiropractic because no physios.
Agreed,
say
but I think it potentially
we can cure
comes
your
within
deafness.
that context of how we, as a society and as professionals, actually perceive back pain.
Maybe it doesn't. The chiropractic page doesn't even mention back pain though. It just says chiropractic treatment generally. It's not about the ailment. The page isn't about the ailment, it's about the treatment.
But
so the treatment, you'd expect it to say, it's safe, but there are risks of stroke, and there's no effectiveness of any for anything. I think it needs to be challenged. And I think
I agree, it needs to be
could
challenged. But I wonder if there's a wider issue there that we need to change how we recognise and understand the evidence for any sort of pain, because largely it's dismissed as a minor problem and something that can't be treated, when in actual fact this affects an awful lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think you could be right there, yeah.
Well, in my experience, anecdotally, and this is anecdotally, but speaking to people, it's a very common perception with the general public, at least, that a chiropractor is just a specialist back doctor.
Yes, and that's what comes through all the way through this article.
Yeah, they don't realise that a chiropractic is a form of alternative medicine, that the evidence for it is very weak, etc., etc., etc. They think it's just, you go to a paediatrician with your kids, and you go to an optician with your eyes, and you go to a chiropractor for your back.
Yeah. And I'll come back to that, because I think that is not an accident, and I'll come back to that. But I think that's why the NHS should make it clear that a chiropractor isn't a recognised back specialist, but it doesn't even particularly mention that on the NHS page. She says her initial appointment cost her £85, and then thereafter £55 for follow-ups. And she says after just a few weeks, it feels like money well spent. But she doesn't say how many treatments her chiropractor recommended, which I think is a pretty key detail here. She quotes a chiropractor, a guy called Andrew Garbett. And he says, here in Britain, we automatically go to the GP when we have a bad back or other joint problems. But GPs are not specialists. In other countries, people will take the entire family along every few months by way of prevention. We're able to diagnose conditions. If we spot something, we can refer a patient to the right expert.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, now there is no evidence that taking your family to a chiropractor regularly can prevent anything other than it's more likely to prevent you from vaccinating your children. Because we've seen evidence
or prevent you from seeing a doctor for serious symptoms that need addressing, that might... lay people would say, "Oh, that's nothing to worry." Like you have a cough for 3 months, and a lot of people are like, "Well, it's just a cough. It's probably fine." Doctor will tell you, "No, that's quite serious. We need to assess what that is."
Yeah, but the only thing, look, you're right. But I think one of the main things that taking your family in to see a chiropractor will prevent you from vaccinating your child. Because I've seen plenty of evidence that chiropractors. Large sections of the chiropractic industry are anti-vaccine and are not shy in telling customers that. Plus, anyone who has seen those videos of chiropractors adjusting the spines of newborn babies for no benefit at all should know to run an absolute mile.
Oh, so that's really expensive. I recently saw a private physio for 3 sessions, and to be fair, on the 3rd session, he suggested that I might want to come back in a couple of weeks, and I said, I think I can manage this myself now, and he didn't pressure me at all, which was good, and it cost me £50 a session.
Yeah.
But that's way cheaper than the chiropractor, who's charging £85 for the first session, and
he's recommending monthly visits.
Yeah.
He's recommending monthly. Well, I'll come back to that in a moment, actually. The article says there are 3,000 chiropractors in the UK, all of whom have taken a 4-year approved chiropractic degree. Yes, but from a chiropractic college rather than from a university or a medical school.
Yeah, approved by fucking who?
Yeah, exactly. And should be registered with a General Chiropractic Council. Areas of study include human anatomy and physiology, biomechanics, and the nervous system. Yes, but you don't study it to the level of a medical college. You study it to the level of a chiropractor. She says it's not uncommon for health professionals like nurses or physiotherapists to train in chiropractic as a secondary career. And I don't know how uncommon it is, but looking at the numbers they've just given, it can't be that frequent. They said there are 3,000 chiropractors in the UK.
Yeah.
Now, if there are, for context, there are 639,000 nurses in the UK.
Right.
If we were to assume that every chiropractor was a nurse, which they absolutely aren't, that would be less than 0.47% of all nurses are chiropractors.
Yes.
It's going to be a vanishingly smaller number of chiropractors, number of nurses who are chiropractors. So to say it's not uncommon, I would say it's pretty uncommon. I would say it's fucking rare.
Yes.
It's 2 in 1,000 or fewer, I would suspect, is the actual number of chiropractors who are becoming nurses who are becoming chiropractors. Chiropractor Andrew Garbett says, I've had patients who came in complaining of back pain who turned out to have kidney issues. On another occasion, I spoke to a patient who was suffering migraines, and having examined him, I sent him to a GP to ask for a brain scan. So even a chiropractor who, if you look at the guy's website, promotes himself specifically as a back health and spinal disc specialist, that's all he talks about, musculoskeletal, spinal health, back health, still thinks he can diagnose kidney problems and brain problems with no training in either area. This is how it can be dangerous. Risha Loti, who is a chiropractor and spokesman for the British Chiropractic Association, quoted in the Telegraph article, points out that 4 out of 5 people will get lower back pain at some point in their life, and that can have a number of origins. Now, 4 out of 5 people getting lower back pain, do you recognise that stat? That's your one poll stat recurring again here. So it's now divorced from the original press release and now just become a truism back chiropractic used to support it in every other place following that. Rishi says, nothing in your body happens in isolation. If one part isn't functioning properly, it's going to cause compensation somewhere else. Our job is not just about treatment, but doing what we can to correct the bad patterns that are likely to the problem flaring up again, that likely lead to the problem flaring up again. Except it isn't, because chiropractors are qualified neither in the treatment nor the prevention of these issues. Mm-hmm. This is where it is a problem. The article ends, she says, for my part, I've been doing the exercises for my feet, calves and my shoulder and my arm. Slowly but surely, I'm making progress. My chiropractor recommends that everyone should book in every month for an MOT. I prefer not to pay for ongoing treatment, but I'm starting to suspect I can't afford not to.
Every month at 55 quid a visit.
Exactly. So this is such an infuriating conclusion to draw here. She went in with a shoulder issue. She was told there was something wrong with her feet, and now it feels indispensable to her that she continue to do the treatment for her feet with regular ongoing treatment sessions with someone who wrongly believes he's qualified to diagnose kidney issues and brain issues. And she ends up so persuaded by this that she recommends readers take a monthly health checkup with a chiropractor. Assuming they find nothing, by the numbers that we've said previously, that's £690 per person per year. They recommend doing this for a family, say a family of 4, and you're talking 1,500, £2,000 upwards. More than £2,000 in fact there. And that's before they find something and then have you come in for the actual treatment. And I have never, ever known anyone who went to see a chiropractor and was told there was nothing wrong with them. I've never seen it. You find someone totally healthy, get them to see a chiropractor, they will find a reason why you need to come back for at least one more thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people saw this Telegraph article or the series of dodgy one-poll-driven PR stories that I pointed out from across the year and then went to a chiropractor result of it. I have no idea. I suspect it's not zero because I suspect these stories continue to, and I think intentionally, muddy the water in the mind of the public as to what constitutes a health professional and what is a pseudoscientific modality pseudo-regulated by an invested industry body. There is a reason why this feature writer puts chiropractors in the same category as mental health professionals and pharmacists. There is a reason why the public see paediatrician as a children's health specialist and chiropractor as a back specialist. That's where chiropractors see themselves. It's where their industry body wants them to be seen, and it's where a significant amount of their advertising and PR budgets are pushing to place them.
So I don't know if I've talked about this on the show before, but for a little while around 2004, 2005, I dabbled with being a comedian.
Yes, yeah.
I think you must have talked about it on the show before because I knew it about you, and I think I've known it longer than you have been talking.
Yes, possibly.
Okay. But there is an overlap between us knowing each other. There's an overlap is I listened to the show before I knew you.
Yes.
But B, there's an overlap between me knowing you and me speaking to you.
Yes.
As there tends to be.
As people who know me will so it's a common experience for people who meet me. It's a long time.
If Alice picked that information up from the show, we can triangulate when it's likely to have been, because it can't have been an early show, because Alice has never heard it.
We can narrow that down. Yeah. But my ambition to be a comedian was only slightly stymied by the fact that I'm not very funny.
That's tricky.
That's unfair. In hindsight, I don't think I ever would have made it as a comic, but I did a few open mic spots in comedy clubs in Liverpool, which I enjoyed doing, and the audience laughed at my material, which was kind of the idea. And the format
I thought you were going to say which was kind of them.
Yeah, well, also very polite of them. They're sitting there applauding like Wimbledon, where they just sit there and just clap very politely. Oh, well done. Top joke, sir.
Bravo.
I love going to comedy shows with comedians because they are so enthusiastic. When they find something funny, they
really
go for it big. Because
see, that's true, but they also laugh at a different point in the joke a lot of the time. The laugh that they give at the punchline is often a bit more performative, and they laugh at a different point of the joke on the pacing. It's like going to see magic with a magician, and they go, way earlier. Not at the reveal. It's like, okay.
10 minutes before the reveal.
Yeah.
The particular format of the spots that I did was you were given 5 minutes free to do your thing, and then another 5 minutes where the audience was allowed to boo you off stage if they thought you were shite.
Right, blimey.
I'm not sure I like that as a concept.
So you're 5 minutes, you know, get up there, do your thing. 5 minutes, if you're shite, get off, right? I got my full 10 minutes every time.
Boom, have that.
Very
Nice.
proud of that. Got my full 10 minutes every time, which was nice. Now, after the last of these spots that I did, I was approached by a talent scout who asked if I would come to an audition they were organising at Zanzibar. That's the bar, not the country.
Yes.
I tentatively agreed that I would like to, that I would do that, and they said they would get in touch, but they never did. And for various reasons, I never performed stand-up again.
That crushed your dream at that moment.
It did. Crushed my dream. The final spot I did was Wednesday, November 30th, 2005, which was just a few days after the death of George Best.
Yes.
Where I did a load of material on George Best, which was good. But one of the things that the Talent Scout said to me is they said they thought that I was a good storyteller. Most of my act was telling stories in one form or another, and I enjoyed that as a comment. I thought that was nice. I'm not sure how true it is, but I enjoyed it nevertheless. And I do quite enjoy telling stories and relating ideas to people in a way which is understandable and hopefully engaging. The backbone of the material that I did on stage was a retelling of the book of Job from the Bible. And Job is an interesting story because it's a story about God thoroughly abusing some poor bloke in a pissing contest that he's having with Satan, who in the book of Job seems to be quite pally with God, even though they classically don't really get on. And it's a story
they have like a sort of love-hate relationship. It's like a will they, won't they kind of thing.
But in the book of Job, they're kind of hanging out. And it's like, you see Job, he loves me. He does. He thinks I'm fucking brilliant. So he's like, yeah, that's only because he's got all this nice stuff. He's got, all right, well, I'll take all this nice stuff away and you'll see how much they're oddly conversational.
Yeah.
But like it is God just torturing a bloke because Satan's going, go on.
Yeah.
Go on. It's a fucking horrendous set of circumstances. God's a psychopath. But it's a story that's quite easy to tell, but harder to tell in a funny way, and even harder to tell while being biblically accurate and characterizing the source text in a way that doesn't needlessly piss off the Christians who might be sitting in the audience. So the reason I mention all this is because we got an email from a listener a couple of weeks ago. Actually, that's not strictly true. The reason I mention all this is because I wanted some narrative introduction to the story to guide the listener into what I was saying slowly instead of just coming right in with a cold open of, hey, let me read you an email, what I got. But notionally, I'm mentioning this because of an email we got a couple of weeks ago from Peter. And Peter says, "G'day, mates." I think I know where Peter's from.
I think he's not Australian. I think he's throwing you off the scent.
You think?
Yeah.
He says, first question to Mike. As Britain's leading expert on placebos, what are your thoughts on the documentary Michael Mosley's Placebo Experiment, which is airing on bloody TV in Melbourne, Australia, as we speak?
Gotcha. I think he's probably from Australia. Yeah.
Might be from Melbourne.
Could be.
Oddly enough. Very simple answer to this one, Peter. I talk about that documentary in detail on episode 235.
Oh, you got. Sorry, is there more? Is that? Yeah.
I wasn't very impressed. Spoilers, I wasn't impressed. But there you go. Episode 235, I talk about that documentary.
You weren't impressed, Mike. That's because you're not a polymath.
That's
if
true.
you were a polymath, you'd understand it better.
I'd understand.
Are we going to start doing this for like every listener who writes in with a question? Just have a little segment on each episode. Say, okay, so this person you want to know about this? It's in this episode.
Go and listen to this episode. It's just kind of live show notes.
Yeah, because that's way better than just annotating our shows correctly for the last 10 years.
Well, see, opening arguments. Their fans made a wiki that just pointed out everything they talked about on every show. Our fans haven't done that.
Yeah, they've got more fans than us, Mike.
Yeah. Our fans need to fucking get on that.
Or we could have just done it ourselves in 10 years.
Fuck that. So the second question, Peter's second question, he says, can you explain to me what the problem people had with the EU was that made them vote for Brexit? Why is it so hard to negotiate an exit deal? What is the backstop? I thought it was a position in baseball. What's hard about a hard Brexit? I know it's not really a skeptical topic, but you're good at explaining stuff and you're British. Which seems to be the
that's your criteria.
Yeah.
Making assumption that because you're British, you understand about Brexit.
I understand what Brexit is.
It's
part of the problem in the first place.
Yeah. It's certainly not borne out by our political class. Yeah.
So thanks for that email, Peter. I think I'm good at explaining stuff. Peter says I am, so that's good. The Talent Scout said so as well.
Okay.
But then they never
These are the two people in your life who've said that. And
yeah.
I'm glad that you keep a record.
But they never called me back to the audition, so fuck them. Although this is a political topic, and listeners often get annoyed when we discuss political topics because there are large amounts of opinion and ideology involved in politics which inevitably leak into our commentary, I think that if an atheist can tell the story of Job without pissing off a Christian, I can have a bash at explaining Brexit without pissing off listeners who voted one way or the other.
Okay.
I mean, I'll probably fail. I'll probably fuck it up. I'll probably piss somebody off.
It's better you than Marsh, though.
Well, I was just thinking, seeing as there's three of us on here, you're going to be the neutral one. Do you need like us to take contrary positions on Brexit to sort of balance this out, so Alice can finally let go of the pretense that she voted Remain and admit to her
pro-Brexit position?
Exactly, her extreme pro. She just believes in turning Britain into a very low regulation tax haven. It's a big, big thing for Alice.
So let's stick to the facts. Leave opinions at the door, and I'm going to try...
It's not going to be you that offends our listeners.
No.
Try and answer Peter's question. So, what was the problem that people had with the EU that made them vote for Brexit? They were racist. No, sorry. It's a bad start. So the European Economic Community, as it was initially named, was created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957, built in the aftermath of the Second World War. The initial signatories to the treaty were Belgium, France, Luxembourg, West Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands.
Luxembourg's done well there.
Luxembourg did all right, snuck in there, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a quirk of that's a geographical.
It is a geographical quirk.
Right,
you look at that initial block on the map; it's one big contiguous block.
Yeah, it's like, who do we need here? How do we solve this post-Second World War world? How do we solve this problem? Well, we're going to need the head of Belgium, France. We're going to need the head of Luxembourg at the table. We can't do this without Luxembourg.
The purpose of the EEC was to create a common trading area amongst its members, with the elimination of trading barriers between member states and the establishment of a common external trading policy. That meant that member states could sell goods and services to each other without having to pay any trade tariffs, and it also pooled their economic power, so they became a single economic bloc, which would in principle have more negotiating power than any single member state would be able to wield alone. This close economic relationship would also hopefully prevent any future wars in Europe, because we just had a couple of those and we weren't particularly keen on a repeat performance.
And this, I guess the context of this, beyond that as well, is a time when the prominence of Russia is about to start rising during the sort of the Cold War period. You've got the superpowers of America, Russia, and by comparison, Central Europe doesn't have a superpower strength.
Yeah,
and so.
And East Germany is right there under Soviet control.
Exactly.
It was a difficult time politically for Europe, as indeed was a good chunk of the 20th century. It was a difficult time.
And it turns out the early 21st century.
But you look at this was 1957, so this is 12 years out from the Second World War, from the end of the Second World War. Europe is still a mess, an absolute mess, when they said, here's a solution to this problem. So the UK joined the EEC in 1973 after a couple of previous attempts were rebuffed. But it was quite a contentious decision. The French didn't want us in there in the initial instance. They thought that British membership of the EEC would inevitably lead to American membership of the EEC, and the American economy would dwarf everyone else, and we would end up just serving American interests, not serving European interests.
Yeah, becoming a vassal state to America.
So France initially were like, no, we don't want you in there. But eventually we were admitted in 1973. It wasn't a popular move with the British people and the British politicians either, and it resulted in Harold Wilson's Labour government arranging a referendum, our first ever national referendum. Turns out, looking this up, we've had 3 national referendums in the UK. 2 of them were on membership of the European Union, and 1 was alternative vote.
Yeah.
But it was
don't mention the alternative vote one. Oh, God.
Our first ever national referendum, which resulted in the population of the UK voting 67% to remain members of the EEC. So we'd been in for 2 years. It was like, do we want to stick with this? 67%, yes, we do. We want to stick with this. Fast forward now to the early 90s. The EEC had become the European Union with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty. This brought EU member states into a closer political union alongside the economic one.
Yeah, cause they called that because it was more strict than previously.
Yes, the Maastricht Treaty.
Treaty, yeah.
This was further strengthened by the Lisbon Treaty, which was signed in 2009. Over this time, the UK had secured a number of opt-outs and exceptions for measures that were meant to more deeply integrate the member states. Notably, we negotiated a rebate on our annual membership fee, and we negotiated an exemption from the otherwise mandatory membership of the single European currency, or the euro. Which became legal tender in 1999 and replaced the national currencies of most of Europe in 2002. So we'd negotiated an opt-out from that. We'd also negotiated an opt-out from the Schengen area as well, which allowed kind of passport-free travel within Europe as well. But the UK and Ireland negotiated an opt-out for that. So it was against that backdrop there were a few major objections to membership of the EU. First, from the socialist left, was the argument that the EU is fundamentally a capitalist club created for capitalists by capitalists with the goal of suppressing workers' rights. From the conservative right, the argument was that we had joined this economic union, which was rapidly becoming a political union, and Britain was slowly losing its sovereignty to centralised European institutions and becoming a United States of Europe. The political union had also introduced the concept of free movement of labour, enshrining the right of EU citizens to live and work anywhere within the EU. So you could be born in France but move to Denmark for work. You wouldn't need a working visa application, there'd be no immigration checks. We're all in the EU, so it's all good. It's no different to me moving from Newcastle to Liverpool. It's absolutely fine.
You can retire to the Costa del Sol.
Yes, and which is something that a lot of British people like to do, is they retire to Spain. It happens. But there were objections to the free movement of labour from across the political spectrum too. The right feared a flood of economic migrants, with citizens of poorer countries moving to richer ones, putting a strain on public services and the welfare system. And the left feared that this kind of immigration would suppress wages, as companies were able to import cheap labour from overseas, leaving British workers either unemployed or forced to take smaller wage packets because they could be easily replaced. I should point out here that I don't find any of these arguments that I've made so far compelling. I'm trying to present them honestly, but I don't think they bear the weight of scrutiny.
No, I agree.
I think the EU supports rather than suppresses workers' rights. Maybe that wasn't the case in 1975, but I think that is the case now.
Well, I think it was the case in 1975. Wasn't it?
What
year did paid holidays leave come in? Because that was an EU directive that was pushed through the UK government.
The EU workers' rights stuff is something that's definitely, as the EU's become more political than an economic institution. And I think early on, when you had people like Tony Benn objecting to the existence of the EU, you know what, maybe they had a fair point. But the version of the EU that they were objecting to, the EEC, is not the version of the EU that exists today.
Yeah.
I don't believe that we're losing sovereignty to EU institutions, especially since we devised many of these institutions and we have the power to veto any new ones. And even the government's own white paper on Brexit acknowledges that the British Parliament is and always was sovereign. It just sometimes doesn't, quote, feel like it, unquote. My understanding is that the evidence shows migrants are a net boon to the British economy, they're not a burden, and there's no good evidence that the wages of British workers are being suppressed by migration. But nevertheless, these are the reasons often cited by people, and maybe those people know better than me.
Yeah.
I don't know. On top of all that, we also have to contend with the British press. The British press have a love of sensationalism and half-truths, which they use to sell papers, and that love is well documented on this podcast and elsewhere. One of their favourite tropes is the Barmy Brussels Bureaucrat, whose love of petty rules and regulations poses a threat to the good, honest, hard-working, normal British way of life. These apparently petty rules are almost always misinterpreted, perhaps even willfully, in order to trump up a story to sell a paper alongside a little bit of national pride.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that trump up was a phrase that meant, inflate, lie, willfully mislead, etc. Before 2016, before any of that happened, that's already what that meant. The canonical example here is bananas. The EU has ruled that bananas have got to be straight. We love our bananas. Why is Brussels meddling with the good British banana? Haven't they anything more sensible to do? Except that none of that is true.
Yeah.
This claim was derived from European regulations which state that bananas must be free from malformation or abnormal curvature. It does not say that they have to be straight. It doesn't say that they have to possess no curve at all. This regulation is designed to ensure a consistent quality of bananas across the EU so that a banana you buy in Bournemouth is of comparable quality to one that you buy in Bruges.
Yes. Even then, isn't that the banana, wasn't that a WTO thing brought into the EU?
It may well have been.
My understanding is that even if we were to leave the EU, we are subject to that so-called bendy banana rule, because it wasn't an EU directive, it was a WTO stipulation.
It was a European directive. It may have been because it was following WTO rules as well.
Also, it's worth here mentioning directives are not mandates.
Yes, and the directives can quite often be voluntary for member states to implement, and if we objected to a mandate, we would have the opportunity to say no, because we have a power of veto, because all member states have to sign off on it. But the banana thing is just not true. It was just like they didn't want to have malformed bananas for sale in the shops. Now, there are people in the ugly fruit movement who may have totally reasonable objections about preventing the sale of abnormally curved bananas But that's a totally different conversation. There was never a directive from the EU which required bananas to be straight. It just didn't happen. There are also stories that the EU is forcing Britain to drop imperial measures in favour of the metric system, except that's not true either. We signed up to convert to metric before we even joined the EEC, never mind the EU. Although our commitment to the EU says that we warrant that we will drop imperial measures eventually, no one is forcing the pace of that. No one in the EU is phoning us up saying, why are you still using miles and pounds here? Why aren't you on meters and kilos? But lazy politicians, when pressed about why we have to sell grapes in grams instead of in ounces, blame EU rules. Instead of acknowledging that this was something that we signed up voluntarily to, independently of Europe. They're like, it's the EU making us do this. My favourite example of the Barmy Brussels bureaucrat is the claim that the German sausage makers have pressured the EU into defining the sausage in such a way that British sausages do not contain enough meat to qualify, and therefore have to be renamed as the emulsified high-fat offal tube. Barmy Brussels bureaucrats strike again. It's Fritz with his bratwurst. Who does he think he is, and who won the bloody war anyway?
Having a pop at the good old British banger,
Except this isn't true either. More than that, this is actually a plot from Yes Minister. Yes Minister is a 1980s sitcom about a fictitious British politician named Jim Hacker and his private secretary, Sir Humphrey Appleby. This is literally a sitcom plot. This never happened. And there are many more of these. The EU is banning barmaids from showing cleavage. The EU is banning firefighters from sliding down poles. The EU says we have to rename the tasty pub snack to Mumbai Mix because Bombay Mix is racist. They're banning corgis. They're banning tea. They're banning yoghurt. All trumped up or at least misinterpreted and exaggerated to sell papers or to disavow an unpopular policy by scapegoating the EU.
Yeah, and a lot of this, the history of this, as I understand it, came from when Boris Johnson was the European correspondent for the Telegraph.
Yes,
and basically kickstarted this boon of willfully misinterpreting EU directives to over-extrapolate what they could possibly mean in order to delight the readers, delight and enrage the readers back home. His stock in trade when he was still working the Telegraph before he was sacked for various things.
The barmaids being banned from showing cleavage thing, for example, was EU rules that said if you have members of staff, if you're an employer and your members of staff work outside routinely, you have to let them cover up in the sun or wear sunscreen.
Yeah.
That's what that was. Rather than...
It's basically saying if you've got a skin condition and can't wear sunscreen, you're still allowed to be protected from the sun.
So that's the British press. So when Britain first joined the EEC, objections to British membership very much came from the left, very much came from the political left. But over the 80s and 90s, that mostly changed. The Labour Party under Neil Kinnock came to embrace the EU, while mistrust of the European project grew under Margaret Thatcher's Conservative Party. Even more so when John Major's government signed the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. By the early 2000s, Tony Blair's New Labour was vociferously pro-Europe, even if Gordon Brown and Ed Balls were suspicious of the euro, while prominent figures in the Conservative Party were explicitly hostile to Europe, notably David Davis, Ian Duncan-Smith and William Hague, two of whom ended up as leaders of the party, one of whom was nearly the leader of the party. At the 2015 general election, David Cameron, who was pro-Europe, beat David Davis at the last round of the Tory leadership contest, but David Cameron was pro-Europe. He promised to offer an in-out referendum on British membership of the EU, largely to placate the Eurosceptics within his own party. Once the public voted to remain in the EU, as they had already done in 1975, then it would settle the question for at least a generation, as it had done in 1975, and allow him to move forward with his conservative legislative programme instead of having to deal with infighting and division over Europe. That was the plan.
Yeah.
It worked spectacularly well, didn't it?
The referendum happened in 2016, but against all expectation, the UK narrowly voted to leave. David Cameron resigned, and Theresa May became leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, responsible for delivering the result of the referendum. So, that's the background. That's what's happened. That's how we've got from there to here. Why is negotiating an exit deal hard? First, to be frank, I don't think the EU was ever designed to leave.
Yes.
It wasn't set up with the idea that member states might want to leave at any point, which means no one's ever thought through that process. Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty includes provisions for leaving, which says a member state can give 2 years' notice, and in those 2 years you would negotiate a withdrawal agreement. But in hindsight, 2 years is not remotely long enough, and the author of Article 50 says that it was only put in there as a sop to keep the Eurosceptics and the British government happy anyway. No one else in Europe wanted Article 50 to exist. It was put in there in order to persuade the British to sign the Lisbon Treaty, because
So at least you've got the option to
at
back
least
out
you've got
later.
the option to leave if you need to.
And to be clear, no one's ever left the EU before, have they?
No. Greece nearly did. That's actually where the word Brexit come from. It originally came from Grexit, which was, is Greece going to leave the EU because of their economic problems, where there was the Greek government debt crisis in the 2000s, early 2000s, which is another reason actually why the left doesn't like the EU, because they consider that the actions of the EU and the IMF were punitive on Greece, where they've forced them into an austerity program to try and get control of their national debt. And that's one of the reasons the left object to the EU. And you know what? That's not an unreasonable thing.
It's one of the reasons Greek people object to the EU as well. Yeah.
So I don't think that it was ever designed to be an institution that you would leave. And maybe that was an oversight from the EU. Somebody needs to have thought this process through. 2 years clearly is not long enough to have negotiated a withdrawal agreement. Maybe 5 years might have been a more appropriate number for them.
Even setting aside issues within the government where there is no unity about what an exit from the EU looks like in the British government.
Well, that is my next point.
Yeah.
Second, negotiating an exit deal is hard because it was never made clear what leave the EU meant. Those who voted Remain knew what they were voting for. They were voting for the status quo. Remain. Things will carry on as they are. But those who voted Leave, while they had an idea in their head what they were voting for, that doesn't mean it was the same idea that was in the head of everybody else. I've spoken to Leave voters who thought that leaving meant we would adopt the Norway model. We would be outside the EU, but within the European Economic Area.
Which is something that Nigel Farage, one of the things he promised it was a possibility.
A Norway model. This is the so-called soft Brexit. Norway is not a member of the EU, but has access to many of its institutions in exchange for a reduced contribution to the EU budget, some regulatory alignment, and accepting free movement of labour. And some Leave voters thought that's what they were voting for. Some Leave voters thought that Leave meant withdrawal from the EU completely, without any access to the institutions, a so-called hard Brexit, a clean break, we start again on our own, just like we did in the olden days, global Britain, looking outwards, and that's what those people thought they were voting for. Some Leave voters thought they were voting Leave to protect British jobs, because employers wouldn't be able to import cheap labour from the continent to replace them. Some Leave voters thought that voting Leave would free up budget for the government to fund the health service, which has been struggling from underinvestment.
And to be clear, underinvestment, not overuse, because that's one of the distinctions. And you said early on that people would have fears that influx of migrants is overwhelming
put a
the
strain
NHS
on the welfare state.
And based on the evidence, that isn't what's happening. It's a chronic underinvestment.
It is underinvestment, I believe, yes. Some Leave voters thought that voting Leave was just giving one in the eye to David Cameron because they thought he was a cock.
Yeah.
And if he wants to remain, then I want to leave because fuck that guy. Some people voted Leave for that reason.
Yes, yeah.
Some thought that voting Leave would accelerate a political revolution in the UK. The government system would fail, there would be chaos and pain in the short term, but eventually they could rebuild the UK as their ideal socialist or communist utopia, free from the yoke of the EU's capitalist club. Some Leave voters actually wanted deeper integration with the EU and thought that voting Leave would inevitably make the UK realise how much it needs the EU, and in 20 years' time we would apply to rejoin, but without all of the special exceptions that we'd previously negotiated. Britain is forced to join the Euro, we're forced to join Schengen, it's mandatory for all new members, and actually I think this might be what happens. Is we will leave for about 20 years, we will reapply, but we won't get any of the special exceptions we have, and we'll end up in the Euro and in Schengen, but by the end of the 21st century, we'll be deeper in Europe than we are now.
I have no idea.
All of these people tick the same box on the ballot paper, each with a different idea of what that meant. Now, Theresa May seems to have taken the hard Brexit line. We are leaving the EU and all of its associated institutions. And she defined what she refers to as the red lines, her non-negotiable points for a future relationship with the EU, which included giving Britain freedom to negotiate its own trade agreements, freedom to set its own immigration policy without having to conform either to EU directives, and taking Britain out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. But the EU and its institutions have become so bound up in the UK and our institutions that disentangling those things is actually proving very difficult. And that difficulty is compounded by the red lines, which means compromises which might have made withdrawal easier are not possible. There could have been compromises like the Norway model where we say, okay, we'll accept this and this, but we're not going to accept that, and okay, there's a deal to be done there. But some of those compromises cross the red lines, which means we weren't able to make them.
Yeah, and you're going to come to Ireland as where some of those red lines are most self-contradictory.
Well, this is indeed my next point. So one of the reasons why a hard Brexit is hard and why an exit deal is difficult to negotiate is because EU and UK institutions are very bound up in each other, and disentangling those things is difficult. A second reason is Northern Ireland. Now, this is a huge, involved piece of background that I don't have the time or expertise to go into in depth, but I'll do my best. The full name of the United Kingdom is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and it is made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. From the early 1800s to the 1920s, the official name of the country was actually the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. But the Irish Free State seceded from the United Kingdom following the Campaign for Home Rule and the Irish War of Independence. As appears to have been standard British foreign policy at the time, and we really do seem to have done this a lot, Ireland was partitioned into Northern and Southern Ireland. We seem to do this every time we leave a country we've invaded.
Yeah.
Is just cut it in two on the way out.
Yeah, there is nothing more terrifying than, say, a 19th century Englishman with a ruler.
The largely nationalist South became what is now the Republic of Ireland, and the largely unionist North became Northern Ireland, and remained part of the United Kingdom. This is a heavily oversimplified telling of this story, but that's the gist. That's more or less how we got where we are. Following the partition, there remained an ideological commitment from groups like the IRA to overthrow the government of Northern Ireland, who they saw as an occupying government. They thought Northern Ireland was occupied territory, and to unite the island of Ireland as a free and independent state. That was their stated goal. Now, this resulted in a decades-long guerrilla conflict with British security forces and loyalist paramilitaries, which was finally brought to an end in 1998 with the signing of the Good Friday Agreement.
It's amazing to think it's only been 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement. 20 years since there were IRA bombs and bomb threats and sectarian violence and things that were happening. And yet it's passed so far from memory that people don't fear a return of those times. It feels like to people outside of the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, at least people in mainland UK and England, that's passed so far into memory as to be history.
Yes.
And the kind of history that we just assume can't happen again. So, well, that's done, that's settled, that's gone. And I think the blasé nature in which people approach the peace process is that piece. I had conversations with actually someone I interviewed for Be Reasonable, Ed Turner, and his very casual, offhanded way of that. Well, if there's problems for Ireland, we'll just reunify Ireland. It'll be fine. Just the casual offhandedness of that is quite astonishing, really.
Yeah. So the Good Friday Agreement set up a legal agreement between the governments of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, creating a power-sharing executive and the Northern Ireland Assembly. The agreement acknowledged that the majority of those living in Northern Ireland want to remain part of the United Kingdom, but that a substantial number of people, including a majority in the Republic of Ireland, would like a united Ireland. Both views are acknowledged in the Good Friday Agreement as legitimate views. The final text of the agreement was ratified by a referendum held on both sides of the Irish border, which laid out exactly what that agreement meant for Ireland. It laid out the fact that convicted murderers were going to be freed. It laid out the fact that the Republic of Ireland was going to be given a say in the affairs of Northern Ireland. It laid out that there were going to be new institutions that were going to be created. And it also said that this is going to bring peace. And so people on either side of that border voted overwhelmingly in favour of the Good Friday Agreement. The turnout was huge and the mandate was huge.
Yeah.
All of this was achievable, at least in part, because of the political union between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland brought about by our membership of the EU. Regulatory alignment and the common market meant that goods manufactured in Ireland were de facto approved for sale in the UK, including in Northern Ireland, and vice versa. The EU's principle of free movement, which was introduced following Maastricht, meant that people and goods were able to move freely across the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And once the Good Friday Agreement dismantled the border posts, then to all intents and purposes, the border wasn't there. It wasn't quite the United Islands that many people had hoped for and are still working politically for, but it was sufficiently frictionless that you could almost pretend. You could live in Northern Ireland and commute to work in Republic of Ireland, or vice versa.
As many people do, in fact, yeah.
There's a motorway that they built down, between there that cut the journey time down from 4 hours to like 100 minutes or something like that. It made a massive difference. People commute over that border constantly, and as I say, you can almost pretend that border isn't there. It is, and everyone knows it is, but you can almost kind of squint.
You can act as
and
if,
pretend that actually, you know what, your United Ireland is maybe kind of there. And then we voted to leave the EU. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible to continue to uphold the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, but it does make it much more difficult. Without that common regulatory framework of the EU, goods moving across the Irish border need to be checked for customs and standards purposes. With the return of those physical border posts looms the spectre of a return to the violent guerrilla conflict which plagued Northern Ireland for years, and nobody has got an appetite for that. But how can you avoid it, while at the same time allowing Britain to assert control over its trade policy as per the red lines? So that is where the backstop comes in. The backstop is a mechanism devised by the EU and the Department for Exiting the European Union as part of the withdrawal agreement, which was agreed to by the UK government as a precondition to continuing negotiation of the withdrawal agreement. And it's designed to prevent a return of the hard border and physical customs checks and prevent a resurgence of the Northern Ireland conflict. Now, Peter asked it in his email, isn't the backstop a position in baseball? In baseball, it's true, the backstop is a position in baseball. In baseball, the backstop is actually a net, which sits behind home base, designed to protect people from wild pitches. If the pitcher throws a ball...
Wild pitches being something thrown rather than like an image that is offensive.
Yes. If the pitcher throws the ball and a hitter fails to hit the ball when it's pitched, and the catcher also fails to catch the ball, then the ball will hit the backstop. So it doesn't hit a bystander in the face. The Irish backstop is a very similar proposition. Between March 29, 2019 and December 2021, the UK will enter a transition period during which the UK will negotiate its future trading relationship with the European Union. One goal of those negotiations is to find a permanent solution to the Irish border problem. Maybe some new shared regulatory framework or some method of electronic customs checks, which means there doesn't need to be a physical border post. But if those negotiations fail or stall or break down or no solution is negotiated and able to be put in place by December 2021, if the hitter fails to hit and the catcher fails to catch, then the backstop kicks in to make sure that nobody gets smashed in the face.
Yeah, and just to go into, I'm not sure if you've got the detail there, but the reason they're talking about customs checks isn't for just the EU fucking about or the EU trying to be difficult or trying to be punitive.
Sure,
it's for the simple fact that if the EU has a rule that goods that move around the EU all have to be at the same standard, you have to check that goods that enter the EU wherever it enters the EU meet that standard. So the two ways to do that are to say that the UK always adopts the standards of the EU. So anything that comes out of the UK, by definition, is already built to EU standards, at which point we are not, in the terms of, as Leave voters would have it, we are not defining our own terms, not defining our own rules. We're having to obey someone else's rules.
Yep, that crosses the red lines.
There's a red line. Or we make our own rules about what our standards are, but every single time anything goes from the UK into anywhere in Europe, it has to be checked to make sure it meets the EU standards.
And vice versa. And vice versa. Yeah. The European stuff has to match our standards when it's important.
But it's much easier for us to forgo those standards in order to say, well, we'll just accept anything that's the right standard of the EU because we are not the big trading bloc.
Sure.
We're ourselves.
Except if we are on World Trade Organization terms, we can't
just accept everything else. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So under the terms of the backstop, the UK will remain in a shared customs territory with the rest of the EU, which means goods will be able to move across the border without tariffs, without checking. This requires the UK to follow EU regulations on those customs arrangements, and it also requires Northern Ireland specifically to remain aligned to the rules of the European single market. And some people find this arrangement unconscionable. for a couple of reasons. One is that Northern Ireland will now maintain slightly different rules to the rest of the UK, which means that goods may need to be checked when they enter the UK from Northern Ireland, even if they don't have to be checked when moving from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland. And Northern Ireland unionists believe the establishment of different regulations for Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the UK threatens Northern Ireland's place as part of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And that's something they're not prepared to entertain.
Yeah.
Secondly, the backstop can only be removed once the UK and the EU agree that it is no longer necessary, which some people believe would leave the UK permanently trapped in a common customs arrangement with the EU, effectively keeping us in the EU by the back door without any say into how it's run or any ability to leave. There's no Article 50 equivalent in the backstop.
No.
Now, the British government is left in something of a bind here. The backstop, which again, to reiterate, is the fallback position for when the hitter fails to hit and the catcher fails to catch. The backstop is a fallback that nobody wants, but is there to guarantee that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the event that everything else we try fails. But the current government does not command a majority in the House of Commons, and instead has to rely on a confidence and supply arrangement with the DUP, a Northern Irish political party, which vociferously wants Northern Ireland to remain in the United Kingdom, and is worried that the backstop will be the first step towards a united Ireland. And that's not something that they want. So they are refusing to vote for the withdrawal agreement. The hardline pro-Brexit factions of the Conservative Party also object to the backstop, because they see it as a way for Europe to trap the UK into a Brexit in name only, where we are forced to accept EU rules without any say in how they're made. So they are refusing to vote for the withdrawal agreement as well. The EU is refusing to remove or soften the backstop because they need that guarantee that there will be no return to a hard border in Northern Ireland, because they think that will destabilise the peace that has persisted there for over 20 years. And the British government is refusing to move its red lines, the softening of which might allow an alternative arrangement on Ireland to be agreed and render the backstop moot. And in the midst of this deadlock, where all sides are refusing to move for various reasons, and reasons that for the most part I think are genuinely meant and felt, we have the looming prospect of a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah.
In the aftermath of the referendum campaign, this was referred to as the cliff edge, or crashing out, with no transition arrangement in place, no withdrawal agreement, no backstop. This could result in Britain losing access to the common aviation area, which means British planes could not fly in EU airspace until we signed a new treaty. The overnight loss of the customs union would mean that long queues would form either side of the English Channel, as all goods would need to be inspected when British trade with the EU reverts to the rules of the World Trade Organization, itself something of a backstop for when nations cannot otherwise agree a trade deal.
And those long queues, again, it's not a... People have written off the long queues as fear-mongering, but the long queues are just logistics. Is that if you don't have an agreement in place, the agreement is just effectively a way of saying, we trust that you're at this standard, you trust that we're at that standard, we have this mutually written down, approved trust, written down on a bit of paper,
yes,
and therefore we can just go through quickly. And what we're saying, what a no deal is, a no bit of paper.
Yes.
So you haven't got that trust written down, and therefore everything would have to be checked. So the long queues aren't scaremongering. The long queues are a logistical necessity, an inevitability if you rip up the piece of paper that says we don't need the queues.
Perhaps most concerningly, it would mean the immediate imposition of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and perhaps the resumption of military activity in that area. And some people are saying, hey, if we don't want a hard border, we just don't put a hard border in place. That's not an option.
Yeah.
We have to check goods going across the border. There's no option about that.
Unless we have an agreement, a bit of paper that says we don't, and we're saying no deal is no bit of paper.
Yeah. Now, some people think those things won't happen. And maybe they're right, I don't know. But there is a serious prospect of a no deal there. There's a serious prospect that this could destabilise Northern Ireland. Oddly enough, somebody like Luxembourg planning to leave the EU wouldn't face quite as many of these problems as we have. Northern Ireland has become something of a unique case for the UK.
It's Northern Ireland and also the Republic, because the Republic's access point in many ways into mainland Europe is via the UK. So you look at energy security policy. The Republic of Ireland's energy comes through underground tubes connecting them to us and us to mainland Europe.
Yes, there's no wires going from Ireland to mainland Europe. They come via the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fine when we're all in the EU, but more difficult.
We are a series circuit, and they need to be a parallel circuit.
So that's Brexit. and what it means and what that means, at least as best as I'm able to explain it. And after all that fucking talent scout better give me a call back. So, Marsh, I gather a new episode of Be Reasonable has just been made available.
Yes, yeah, I've got quite a few episodes stored up. The latest one, the February one's come out. This is Yuka Elsinga from the Dutch group The Pure Gospel of Flat Earth. And we do talk about Flat Earth, but we talk specifically about how he and his group firmly believe that the Flat Earth is proof of biblical literacy. Literalism,
yes.
Not literacy. The literalism would have to flow from literacy. You have to know what's in there before you can take it literally.
It's mostly spelled correctly, the Bible.
Yeah.
I think it is. It might be a bit archaic, but it's spelled correctly.
Exactly. So he talks about why Flat Earth is proof that the Bible's right. He also talks about how it is more plausible, how the evolution theory of the evolution of human and the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe are implausible and are way less plausible than the Garden of Eden 7-day creationism, a snake talked to Eve. He literally says at one point in the interview that a talking snake is clearly more plausible than the idea of evolution.
Well, at least we know there's such a thing as a snake, and then just to have one talking is not that big a leap.
It's dead easy.
Not that big a leap. Then,
and also, it only takes one snake to have talked. We don't need to see evidence of other snakes talking, because it only takes one snake to have been able to talk, and it turns out it would have had to have been the one snake that there's only one particularly biased account of it ever existing, and it doesn't even mention that it's necessarily a snake. So That's the latest Be Reasonable. You can check that out on iTunes and where podcasts live if you look for Be Reasonable.
My favourite thing about the snake story is that the snake as punishment for misleading Eve is you have to crawl on your belly for the rest of your days.
Yeah.
And it's like,
no arms and legs.
What was it doing?
What was it doing before that?
Was it hopping around on the end, on the tip of its tail? What?
It must have had arms and legs.
It might have just been a guy. It might look exactly like a guy. We've drawn snakes, the history of snakes in the Bible all wrong. Yeah.
It was like a little millipede, had loads of arms and loads of legs.
No, that's not going to be... Then I reckon a millipede is basically crawling around on its belly. Its legs are too small to lift its belly up.
Slightly longer. Maybe it had legs like...
giraffe.
When you see a moorhen and you see them on the water and these little squat things and then they've got these really long legs.
Really long legs when they come out.
Yeah. I think it had legs like a giraffe. I think the snake was like 7 foot off the ground, but still a snake.
Had to stoop for Eve to hear, to be honest.
It was just this long, thin tube that is 7 foot off the ground on massive... Not even legs like a giraffe.
Maybe it had wings.
Like big, chunky... No, it says it loses its arms and legs, didn't it?
No, it says you've got to crawl on your belly.
I thought it said we'll take away your arms and legs and it'll crawl on your belly.
No, it says crawl on your belly.
It might be flying. It might have been a flying flesh tube. Blimey. God, what a world.
We should also plug Skeptics in the Pub. So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is 2 weeks today in the Casa on Hope Street. That's going to be Massimo Polidoro from CCAP is going to be coming along to talk about the Leonardo da Vinci, the scientist, as opposed to Leonardo da Vinci, the artist.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are the same human being for the sake of clarity.
Yes.
It's not like there's just another bloke.
Another guy just ripping his name off, just to make it Massimo's.
With the same name. But yeah, the life of the scientist and skeptic, Leonardo da Vinci, as opposed to the artist, which people are much more familiar with.
That's right. You can also come to Skeptics Pub Social tonight in Dr. Duncan's, though I will not be there because I'll be knocking around Europe.
Oh, really? Schengening around? I'm having a good little
Schengen around. I'm going to Munich, and then I'm going to Strasbourg, and then I'm going to Luxembourg, and then I'm going to Brussels.
Having a good little Schengen around.
Proper Schengen.
Also, MSS 10. MSS 10 is our 10th anniversary event. It's going to be a one-day event, an all-day event, including a big party in the evening. That's going to be happening on the 6th of July, 2019. You can find more information about that at MSSX. X is in the Roman numeral. MSSX.co.uk. Tickets are £29. A bargain, a mere £29 for a full day of talks from awesome people. And celebrating 10 years of the Merseyside Skeptics Society and of Skeptics with a K podcast. And we would really love to see all of you listeners there.
Yeah, come along, it'll be fun.
We can't fit all of our listeners in the room.
No, we can have a good bash, though. I'll keep packing them in till the fire marshal says no. That's what I'm going to do. Aside from that, then, that is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains, then, is for me to thank Alice for coming on today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Marsh.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.